Hi, Comics Cubers. Welcome back. Today, Paul, LaMar, and I are talking to Eisner nominee for Best Writer, Mark Russell, for his Eisner-nominated limited series, Superman Space Age. We asked Mark about how Space Age came to be, his meditations on the inevitability of death, the importance of hope, why Lex Luthor is obsessed with Bruce Wayne and not Superman in this universe, Superman and Batman's thoughts on the trolley problem, working with Mike and Laura Allred, his approach to the rest of the DC universe, and what he thinks happened after the story ended. Let's get to it.
Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the Comics Cube. I'm Paul, and I'm here with my friends Duy and LaMar. And we were going to talk about Eisner-nominated Superman Space Age. So we thought it would be a good idea to get the Eisner-nominated author of Superman Space Age on with us. And he's very, very kindly agreed to join us. Hooray. So we're just going to talk about Superman Space Age. And and join in the comments. Let us know what you think.
Mark Russell, I just want to say, when this episode goes up, it'll be a week before the Eisners. Good luck.
Oh,
yeah. Okay. Good luck. Good luck. Yeah.
So too late for me to affect the voting. I guess it's already too late.
I think it's already too late. Is it? It's done.
I think
yesterday,
voting ended like yesterday.
Well, good luck.
And good luck. Good luck with that. Yeah, I think that was nicely done on your part, Duy, as well, because I'm pretty sure I said everything except your actual name then, Mark. So, so thanks for slipping that in. Right. Well, let's begin. So, Superman Space Age, here it is. Yeah, highly recommend it. All three of us absolutely loved it. And yeah. So, just to sum up to everyone watching, it's a story about the life of Superman, but it's the life of Superman spanning the 1960s to the 1980s. And it's also about the latter half of the 20th century, I think, and also about the inevitability of death as well, but in a quite a hopeful way, if that makes sense. So,
I love the way Paul sums it up, because, you know, I feel like most other comic book fans would be like, it's about an alternate reality Superman who dies during the Crisis on Infinite Earths. By the way,
I like Paul's summary better. I think I might steal
that. Yeah, it's also about what Duy said. Batman's in it. It's great. It's absolutely brilliant. So I think I'm going to kick off by asking you, Mark, if this is okay, about the creation of Superman Space Age, because what really, really intrigued me when I was looking at Duy's interview with you that you guys did before Space Age came out, I recommend everyone watching to check it out, was that you mentioned that this was originally pitched as part of DC's 5G thing, and it was going to be a 21-issue series. And as much as I love the series as it exists, I found that sort of glimpse of what if quite fascinating as well.
Yeah, I feel like in a lot of ways, I don't want to, I was happy to be part of the 5G thing, but in a lot of ways it sort of liberated the project when that folded. And then we were able to sort of not worry about like writing an issue for each individual year, just be able to tell a story about a decade. So each book encompasses one of the decades. The first book is about the 60s, the second is about the 70s, and the third is about the 80s, which really freed up the flow of the storytelling and allowed me to do things I don't think I could have done if we had been, sort of like chained to like having one issue per year, which was the original vision.
So was it going to be sort of proper Superman, as it were, sort of canon Superman when it was 5G? Is that right?
No, this was always the concept that it would be Superman on one of the other universes.
Okay.
But it was going to be the 2G Superman, as opposed to the 5G, which is the new one. But you know, but just in terms of the storytelling, it really allowed us to like do some creative things with, you know, like having little asides to the Justice League and the other characters because we didn't have to make every issue about Superman.
Yeah, yeah.
Mark,
cool.
did you come up with the idea yourself, or was it in a meeting room with one of the editors, or what?
When they were doing the 5G thing, they approached me about potentially writing the 2G Superman. So they asked me to come up with some story ideas, and this is the story idea I came up with.
Okay. Did
That's
that
amazing.
come before you read Crisis on Infinite Earths or after?
Before I read Crisis on Infinite Earths a long time ago.
Okay.
But to me, that was originally going to be a reveal. Like you were going to think that this was the canonical, you know, our universe Superman, and then it was going to be a reveal that this was a completely different universe. But because we weren't part of the 5G thing, I changed it so that's revealed pretty early on that this is what's happening. And then it's more about, which I think again made it better because it's more about Superman's sort of philosophical musings about what it is to be Superman, knowing that the world is going to come to an end. What does it mean to be Superman when you are doomed to fail?
Mm.
And to me, that really gets to the heart of the character. It's like, it's not about the results. It's about being your best possible self.
Yeah.
What it is.
I mean, yeah, this is like the big theme that jumped out at me when I read it was like, yeah, just this sort of specter of death hanging over everyone in terms of, you know, with Superman, he knows that the crisis is coming, or, you know, it's niggling at the back of his mind thanks to Pariah. But everyone else, you know, it's the Cold War and, you know, the specter of the bomb kind of thing. And it feels like quite relevant in a
Yeah.
scary sort of way now.
There's a line in there which sort of haunts me because you know I think this is kind of the way I feel about it is that you never see the truck that hits you, and I
Yeah.
feel like that's kind of the way it works out in Superman Space Age. Is everyone's worried about the Cold War, everyone's worried about the Soviet Union, never imagining that it's, you know, the anti-monitor that's going to doom them. And I feel like in a lot of ways that's what behind a lot of my angst now is that we're all worried about things that are so immediate and temporal. We're not really looking for the truck that's barreling down 3 blocks away that will hit us if we don't get out of the road.
Mm-hmm. Are you talking climate change or the eventual civil war of
It could be
humanity?
climate change. You know, that's the thing. There's so many trucks out there. Could be climate change. It could be AI. It could be gamma rays for all I know. You know, who knows? But it's the sort of thing where it's like you have to. It's like you can't get so caught up in immediate life that you forget to think long term. And I think that's the hardest thing for us as Homo sapiens to do is to think long term because we're so evolved to think about, you know, like the next meal, evading a tiger, those sorts of things that we don't really take time to think about what are the things that could doom the species in the next 200 years, or what is it the world going to be like for our grandkids. And you know, our brains are big and complex enough that they're ideally built for dealing with those kinds of long-term problems, but our emotions and our, you know, the needs of our immediate survival sort of sabotage that. So we're constantly consumed with, you know, what's going on. And I don't want to say the immediate's not important. I mean, if you don't, you've got to get to the point where you can face an extinction event for that to matter. But but we should be spending more of our time, I think, thinking long term about the realities and the dangers facing our not only our civilization but our species.
Absolutely. Oh wow. So, Duy, I mean, what kind of leapt out to you? Did any of these themes hit home to you?
Well, yeah. So
That's good.
I was-
I'm just gonna put that on the back cover.
this is why I usually ask the questions, Mark. So, the other I was making a list of lines that really stuck out to me as I was rereading the book, you know, and one of them was really the one that really stuck out to me was well, one was heroism is the act of being where you're needed most. But the other one that really stuck out to me was like, hope is the lie we make come true. Where'd that come from?
I think in a lot of ways, when I am able to come up with like a funny or sort of a piquant line, it's just because I'm absorbing a lot of things I've been thinking into as few as words as possible. Uh, so I feel like in a lot of ways that was the essence, the diluted essence of undiluted essence of my feeling that we're doomed, but I gotta like keep pretending like we're not, because I've got to like somehow find some way to keep living, even though I feel like it's increasingly hopeless.
It's like as long as we're still alive, we would like to have an optimal experience.
Yeah, and
life.
and you never know. I mean, another line Superman says is, "You're never quite as doomed as you think you are," which is also what I tell myself. Is like, we are dumb. We are dumb enough to get ourselves in these messes, but we're also smart enough to get ourselves out.
Yeah.
So we're all like holding on to that bit of wreckage, telling ourselves that the boat's
Yeah.
going to come the next day.
That's a very real
Mhm.
metaphor for, I think, my own sort of like mental state is like holding on to the wreckage, because I feel like there is going to be a lifeboat. There's going to be somebody's going to come by in the ocean, and so
It's-
all you got to do is keep holding on.
It's true. I think
Mhm.
like, did you write that during COVID? Because I feel like that's what the entirety of 2020 felt like. As people were getting sick and people were dying and people were on incubators and stuff, and you're like, when's the vaccine gonna get here? I just
Yeah, I
lost
wrote a
half
lot
of
of
the
that.
listeners.
I don't know if I wrote that specifically, but I wrote a lot of this story during COVID and coming out of COVID, which probably shows.
And I think the other thing that really stuck out to me. Well, are we gonna talk about the ending, Paul?
Yeah, I guess so. Yeah, we could put a little spoiler warning, couldn't we? I suppose.
Are we gonna talk about the ending later? Because if we
Oh,
are,
right. I see what
like,
you mean.
I'm gonna bring it up later.
Well, we're not going through it chronologically, so I think it'd be fine for you to bring it up now, I think.
Yeah, so I mean, there's all that stuff about the trolley problem, which is very thought provoking. But the thing that was really thought provoking for me was the very end. Does Superman really save everyone? Is that what is that in your belief system, Mark? Like, does he save
No.
everyone, or is that
He doesn't save everyone. He saves the people who had enough faith in him to like give him their DNA. But there are, I'm sure, like, I think there's even a line in there that says it's about 2 billion people,
yeah?
or about half the world's population. So
Well,
there are people who, didn't believe Superman, or, didn't, for whatever reason, didn't trust it. And they obviously just perished with the extinction of the earth.
well, I think what I mean is, you think this method of saving people? I guess my question is, are those the same people?
Yeah, and I tried to explain that as best I could in the thing about how this is a quantum DNA signature. So
Yeah.
it's not just like a replica. It's not like a clone of you. It is like every subatomic particle, of where you were at a specific time, recreated, so that it is exactly you, including the very thought you were having at that moment, replicated. So yeah,
Okay.
it's more than a clone, because they have all the memories and all the experiences. I mean, you could argue more abstractly that they are different people, because the physical person of the physical original on Earth, of like Lois Lane, died, but then an exact replica, including all of her memories and what she was thinking at the time she gave her sample, were reanimated on this other world.
Yeah.
So do you kind of set it up at the start as well? I noticed there was a little line in issue 1 where like Jor-El's teaching Kal-El, and he kind of says something about like turning energy into matter and all that. Was that a little setup there for it?
Yeah, and I think also there's when he first meets Jor-El, like Jor-El, or the automated program of Jor-El, assumes that because he's found the Fortress of Solitude, that means he's unlocked his powers. That means he knows how to use his powers. So he just assumes that Superman by this point has discovered how to use all of them. And it's only there that Superman realized, wait a minute, I got what? I got the power of X-ray vision. I've got the power. I've got this enormous scientific intellect. When did that happen?
How did hologram Jor-El place a chair behind the iceberg?
That's a good question. I thought about like including some lines about that because that occurred to me when I was writing it about how his like transmitter like could barely lift this, but I thought, at that point, I'm just wasting panels
I agree.
and people are giving me like the suspension of disbelief. So I use the suspension of disbelief when you've got it. But it was the rest of the story was about Superman discovering these powers that Jor-El told him he had that he had no idea of. And I feel like in a lot of ways that's the role of teachers to students, is to tell kids that they got these powers they just haven't learned how to use yet.
I agree. It is wasting panels, and I will say that if you were working on this with someone like Richard Pace, and he's rendering everything like realistically, I would question it more. But since you were working with Mike Allred, I'm like, oh yeah, of course there's a chair behind the iceberg. He said so.
Also, I could think of like, I'm not going to name them, but I can think of a couple comic writers who would have spent about 3 pages explaining that chair.
Yeah. That's a slippery slope, especially when you're writing superhero characters, because then you explain how they can fly. Do you explain, how X-ray vision works? I mean, at some point, you just kind of have to like go with the magic.
It's a solid burn,
absolutely.
Paul.
It's very subtle.
What? What did I
say? So, I'd like to talk about the thing that sort of sends Superman into the world. And I think this is a really good point to bring in LaMar as well, because it's Kennedy's assassination. Sorry, that sounds like I'm implying you did it, LaMar.
I mean, why not? Yeah, just throw it on top of the pile of the stuff I get blamed for. It's no big deal.
The Kennedy assassination, because of course Duy and myself, we're not American, but Mark and LaMar, you guys are. And I wanted to ask you both, what does the Kennedy assassination mean to you as Americans, and how does it feel, what does it mean today in 2023? So maybe ask LaMar first. Perhaps you could
I guess
a little bit.
I guess I want to add to that the question of like, how is it taught in schools? Like in what, what is the how is that event like taught in schools? Like, how do you learn about it?
Okay.
Well, luckily I wasn't alive. Luckily I'm not that old. I wasn't around. But yeah, in schools it's taught very, like this is a major historical event. And understandably so, because it did have huge implications for not just, this beloved president was shot down as prime, but it also created like a lot of issues, because Lyndon Johnson came over and he got us into the Vietnam War, and also he was assassinated at a time of really heightened tensions with the Soviet Union. We just come out of the Cuban Missile Crisis, so at the time people weren't sure if the Soviets were behind the assassination, and it possibly could have precipitated a nuclear war. So it's taught as like a major historical event, and I think in a lot of ways it is sort of like still used in the collective unconscious as this sort of marking point between sort of the it's like the end of the happy story of America. That's where the credits should have rolled for our civilization after we won World War II, and I had Kennedy's like going to the moon speech, and the future just looks bright, and then let the credits roll, but it didn't happen that way. He was assassinated. We got mired in Vietnam. There was massive. Then we started finding out it became harder for people to deny what was happening in the South with segregation, and because we were seeing it like live on TV every night in the news, when they were like sicking dogs on demonstrators and murdering civil rights workers who were trying to register to vote. And so in a lot of ways it pulled back the curtain on our self-mythology of like, this is, we're this great and noble people who are can always be counted on to do the right thing. And after the Kennedy assassination, all of that seemed to be disabused.
Thank you very much for that, Mark. LaMar, what's your experience as an American of the Kennedy assassination?
Well, I'll start with like my mom, right? Peace be upon her. She's an ancestor now, but she was born in 1958, right? So when my experience with it is that, you know, like when she was a child, this was happening, right? So when I was a child and she was telling me about it, she was talking to me from the perspective of a child. So it was really easy for me to understand what was happening. So, because when she was telling me the stories, you know, I was the age she was when it was happening. And, you know, obviously, you know, there was a need for me to actually be educated on it before I left the house. So when I went to school, I already kind of knew what was going on, because in the area where I lived, we had our own things that were going on, because I grew up in a small town. So, you know, but, you know, like I didn't have to live through seeing people get sprayed with hoses and, you know, they going down the street and stuff. I didn't see that till later. But I can just imagine her being a child and being inundated with this stuff in the news and stuff like that, right? It obviously has to have an effect on you. So it was just, my people just decided that, you know, that kind of stuff, it was important for me to know. And they made sure I knew it, right? And so by the time I got into school, like when you talk about JFK, for example, you know, they teach it where it's like, okay, JFK was this great dude. He was a young president. Everybody loved him. And then there was somebody who didn't love him. And then they took his life in front of everybody in Texas. And, you know, and then a whole bunch of bad stuff happened after that. Right. And that's kind of how they tell it. But it's like, it's a little more complex than that. Right. So just a lot of, which tends to be the case in history books in America in general. There's certain things they focus on, and then they go into a lot of detail on, or at least, you know, they give you some sort of narrative. But other things, they kind of like will chop it up. It's the same thing when you talk about slavery and, you know, that kind of stuff. And then they get into the stuff with the Civil War and the battles and everything. They give you more details about the fights. And then, you know, the other stuff in the details of the happenings of the people, you don't get that, right? So, because here in America, and I don't know about like where you guys grew up at, but they tend to teach history as like episodes. It's like watching television, right? So you have these people did this on this date, and then that's the end of the episode. Then you got another episode. These people did this on this date, and then there's another episode.
Yeah, that's
and
how
that
we're
goes
taught.
on. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, that's how it is. It's a really poor way to teach people history, right? Because there's no context. And that's part of the problem. It just becomes factoids, you know. And when you have events that are complex, it becomes really, really hard for people to kind of get their feet firm in these things that happened, right? And it's also really easy for people to kind of skew things in the direction that they want other people to view them in, which happens a lot. And, you know, it's happening right now. Like when you figure here in America, I think it's like 60% of people, I think, never finish a full book after they get out of high school. Because, you know, and I've had people tell me that, hey, I've read all the books I need to read. I got my high school diploma. So I was like, got it. Thank you. That's all I need to know. I don't, you know, I know where to go with you. Right. But yeah, that's pretty much what it's like. And just as me being Black, there's certain stuff that obviously was prioritized, right, over other stuff, you know. But I'm glad that my people gave me that, right? Because it led me into doing a lot of things I do now. And it was actually really, really important to my development as a human being to have that, you know.
Brilliant, thanks. While you were talking there, it kind of made me think of another part of Space Age, the how you handle Watergate, Mark, in that, and just what really struck me from that bit was Clark's reaction to it. Just like, well, he's got to be a robbery because politicians just wouldn't do that now. Like, you know,
or if they did, they wouldn't be that stupid.
They wouldn't be that stupid. But it's almost like we've gone so far the other way now. You know, it's almost like everyone's so cynical, but they don't have the sort of resources behind them to deal with that cynicism almost.
Yeah.
Well, I think in a lot of ways, what, you know, Clark is doing is what we all did, you know, during the the Trump era, it was like, well, come on, there's got to be a floor. They can't get any dumber than this, right? It's not, surely we won't go there. And every time we like drew the line saying this, surely this is the moment where he will not be the Republican nominee. We just crashed through that floor of expectations. Then surely he will not actually be president.
Little did you realize Trump had a shovel.
Yeah, and so I think it was like about how, and I think this is maybe what makes Clark not as good of a journalist as Lois Lane, is that he wants to see the best in people. He's trusting, whereas the reality is that there is no bottom until you make one.
And
Mhm.
yeah, and Lois sees things objectively, right? As opposed to Clark.
Yeah, I think she
who's
sees it like a scientist almost. It's like, well, what's the most, it'll break it down, and what is the evidence point to, and what's the most logical assumption, or what are the questions you can't answer based upon the available evidence. And that's why she quickly susses out that it had to be conspiracy, because there's no other way for these people to have from all these different walks of life to have known each other but through some sort of like like heist team put together by a higher power.
And Clark doesn't even think about that.
No.
Or does he think about that and think, well, obviously they get together all the time because that's how humanity is supposed to work.
Yeah, I don't think he even thought about it. I think he's just like, he's trusting. It's like, well,
Yeah.
It made me think like when during the interview where Lois is interviewing Superman and he's got the flowers behind his back, and he's expecting her to give him an easy ride, and because he's just saved the world from an asteroid,
Yeah, he thought that was going to be like the greatest day of his life.
Yeah. And then she's doing exactly what journalists should be doing when they're confronted by someone that powerful,
Yeah.
And it just made me think like, the way that Superman's almost like a sort of fantasy we tell ourselves about, this is how we'd like people with great power to deal with it. In a way, it's almost like Lois is like a sort of fantasy of how we want journalists to deal with their power.
Right.
Do you think
Ideally, that's the way it would work, that Superman would be the government, Lois Lane would be the media.
Yeah.
Did I tell you about the asteroid?
So I think
that had me laughing. I'm just going to say that had me laughing.
Brings it up later on to Batman.
Keeps bringing it up.
At that point, I thought, well, I'm going to be the greatest hero. I mean, everyone's going to love me from this point on.
So if I say this enough, someone's bound to be impressed.
Yeah. I think that brings us nicely into discussing the characters. So we talked a little bit about Lois there, perhaps we go back to it later on. But I was really fascinated by how you dealt with Pa Kent. And it made me think of the movie Man of Steel quite a lot. And because, what I think that film, and I'm not, bringing the whole kind of Snyder thing into this or the debate about Man of Steel or anything like that. And I quite enjoy the film, but it's got its flaws. Or
he is alone in that.
I'm alone. No, but I mean, I think it is, they don't deal with Kevin Costner's Pa Kent very successfully, but I get the impression that they're trying to do the same thing that you did in Space Age, which is give a very human Pa Kent who's very afraid for his son. And I felt you did it a lot more successfully. And me and Duy and LaMar were talking about this on another occasion, and we were talking about how it just felt really authentic. So I was wondering, does that come from real life, that sort of relationship that Clark had with his father at all?
Well, I think part of it is that the Pa Kent in my book is not just afraid for his son; he's afraid for the world from his son. And I think what maybe is a little different, or what I tried to sort of earn his fear by saying he's someone who's been out in the world. He's seen what's going on out there. He's fought in a war, and he knows how bad things can get out there. And he just doesn't want his son to become part of it. He doesn't want his son to be turned into the sort of monster he could have become by virtue of having been put into a war where he was expected to kill people. And he doesn't want the world to like have to deal with his son the way they had to deal with the Japanese Empire.
Mm.
Yeah. Maybe that's what's missing from that movie then, is just that context for Pa Kent's feelings, you know?
Mhm.
Right.
sure
I think
the
that's,
LaMar,
and
yeah.
you could get away with having a character say or do anything as long as you create a believable sort of bedrock for that to exist on. You create the
Yeah.
foundation for that
Yeah.
character's perspective.
Yeah, because that was my complaint about Man of Steel. Not, I don't want to turn this into a thing we're comparing to Man of Steel. Was that there's no context for it. It's just he's afraid. Like, don't go save people, Clark. It just makes zero sense. Makes
Yeah.
zero sense. But here in this book, it's like when he says to Ma Kent, oh yeah, we can't protect him from the world anymore, and then we can't protect the world from him. Like, yeah, that makes sense to me. Like, I understand that you might not want to unleash this all-powerful being into the world.
Yeah.
So that to me that makes a lot of sense. And I just want to ask Mark, when Superman comes out and then all of these other superheroes start following him in that world, do you imagine that somebody like Pa Kent or everyone else who's in the same boat get more and more afraid, or do they get used to superheroes?
I think they get used to them. I think we get acclimated to them. And I think also the reason why the Hall of Justice is formed is so they can talk about the proper role of superheroes. And they can, not just like everyone acting on their own judgment, but talk about what the responsibilities that this power places on them and what sorts of things are in their purview, which is frustrating to Batman because he believes fundamentally that justice is local, that justice is, finding creeps on the street or the guys you can actually take care of, that night, not worrying about these, not worrying so much about the asteroids and, and Brainiac and the Anti-Monitor and these more metaphysical threats that Superman is concerned with.
Yeah, what's he say? It's like a shipwreck, and you've just got to grab who you can.
Yeah,
And that's the best
that's
you could
Batman's
do.
philosophy in a nutshell.
Yeah.
but Superman
So
can't
whereas
grab.
in his opinion, Superman's thinking about like, gee, what if we could someday stop all shipwrecks? It's like, well, there's a shipwreck now. We need to go get people out of the water.
That's the trolley problem as well. That's their approach to the trolley problem. Like, what's this? Superman's like, well, we just save everyone and stop trolley problems from happening. And Batman's like, well, we let one person die out of spite, so the person who's tied those 5 people don't get what they want,
Well, and Superman's position is very understandable because he's an all-powerful being. So to him, the important thing is not necessarily the results of this one thing he does, but maintaining himself as the kind of person who doesn't choose who gets to live or die, being the kind of person who values humanity. Because if he ever does get in that business of saying, I'll save him, but not him, then, that's what creates what would eventually be a monster, would turn him into a monster. But the fact that he's somebody who is like, well, even if I fail, if I'm the kind of person who wants to save everybody, that will ultimately result in the most good for the human race than if I'm somebody who's picking winners and losers.
Do you think so that's Superman's philosophy. Do you think he's capable? Do you think he understands that the average human being can't think like that? They can't save everyone. Like,
I don't know that he understands.
Yeah,
but
or is he too powerful?
I think it's just a different perspective based upon his power. But I think he, like him and Batman have a conversation about this very point. I think he kind of understands that, like, yeah, Batman's only going to be around for, a little while, and he's got to like do what good he can do now. He can't think about the end game the way I do. He's got to like do what he can tonight.
It's almost like Lois is disagreeing with him as well in that first interview, because she says like, well, in the time I took to say you're great, loads of people have just died, so she actually confronts him with, well, you are deciding who lives and dies, like, just by being you.
Which is true. It's like you decide just by virtue of like not deciding. who you're going to save and who's not. And and I think what Superman comes to realize because of like conversations with Lois and Batman is that it's impossible for him to save everyone. It's impossible for him to save the world. The best he can do is help us all survive and to like help us in our own sort of struggle for survival.
Is that what he's doing at the end, do you think, with the crystal, you know, saving everyone on the crystal? Is he just doing the shipwreck thing on a larger scale?
Sort of, but I think he is like, you know, people have to meet him halfway. People have to like, you know, buy into this program in order for him to, in order for it to work. And so I think it is like sort of him not just saving people, whether they want to be saved or not, but him like meeting people halfway in their own sort of like quest to survive the end of the world.
Mm.
Oh, by the way, I just want to point out that first interview with Lois, I really like the fact that Lois isn't drawn like she's angry at him. I think that would have been a really easy trap to fall into, but I think it's so much more nuanced the way that you guys depicted it.
Thank you.
That's a good way of bringing in Mike and Laura Allred, I think. So were they involved right from the start when you pitched this?
Well, not right when I pitched it, but soon after, because when it got approved, Brittany, my editor, said, make a list of artists you'd like to work on this. And she said, don't try to think strategically. Don't try to think, well, who you can get, or who, you know, don't try to play it safe. Think bucket list. Like if you could have anybody draw this, you know, and she said, I'll do the same. And so we both made our own lists, and Mike was the only name that was on both of our lists. So he was the first person we called, and amazingly, this has never happened to me before or since. First person you called is like up for it and wants to do it. So they were on board like almost from the get-go.
Who were the other people on your list?
Oh, I don't want to say. Yeah, I don't want anyone to feel left out.
Yeah, because they'll know if they watch this, they'll know that they weren't on Brittany's list.
Yeah. But yeah, they were all like really artists I really have a ton of respect for.
What do you think Mike and Laura brought to it then?
Well, the reason why Mike was on my list initially is because I think that his lines are so clean and strong that he really, I think you see his characters, you feel like they are very earnest, like they really believe the things they're saying because they're very sort of strong, which is I think is a perfect way to draw Superman. And also because he's just super good at sort of cosmic weird imagery, which also I thought really would lend itself to this project, which did. So I think that's what I wanted from Mike. And Laura is just a great color, so I mean, she just makes everything pop and come to life in a way which I wanted. I wanted this to be sort of a visually spectacular series. I didn't want it to, because I know when I'm writing, it's like, oh, great, 5 pages of a guy like, you know, in a coffee shop thinking to himself, you know, I didn't want it to become that. I wanted to be like, you know, Superman flying through the Oort cloud, you know, with like stardust trailing him. You know, I wanted it to be that sort of visual. So the Allreds were I think perfect sort of companions for putting this together.
I feel like their style is sort of like on the surface, you know, you see their art for the first time and you think, oh, it's just sort of throwback pop art, but obviously there's so much more going on in it than that. There's so much more detail and storytelling going on in that. And I thought that was quite appropriate because, you know, you see the synopsis for Space Age, you think, oh, but it's nostalgia or whatever, but it's not that. It's so much more than that. So
yeah, what I didn't want to do is just have like things like in the background for no reason, or, you know, it's sort of like nostalgia for nostalgia's sake. I wanted to embed this in, you know, our actual world history, but I wanted to make sense. I wanted it to be there for a reason. Things like historical details are there because they're part of the plot. You know, things like the Kennedy assassination and the in Watergate and you know, even the wreck of the Edmund Fitzgerald are all there to sort of like weave into like the story, not just as like you know, hey, remember this, or anyone remember the Beatles? You know,
yeah, the Beatles on Sullivan was amazing. The way you did that.
That was great. The termites.
That was fantastic.
You did say in one of our last interviews, Mark, you did say everyone really hates a tasteful homage. there's really no point in trying to recreate an old property because people had that. People might pick up a
Yeah.
copy of it because they like the old thing. But if it's just the old thing, that's going to lose interest really quick. And I think that's one of the things that really helps with the Allred. The Allreds really helped with for this one, because I think that, quite honestly, if any other writer who was, you know, known for maybe working on mainstream books was doing a story like this for Superman, I would imagine they'd make it a continuity exercise. But you were not doing that at all, and some characters were, you know, not acting the way I'm used to them acting. So I'm thinking of Lex and kind of Bruce,
Yeah.
to some extent.
I wanted that. Yeah, right. Exactly. I wanted this to sort of exist as in what I felt should the way the story should, not necessarily conforming to people's expectations, which I think ultimately is what continuity does, and why it's not really conducive to good storytelling. So it's really about conforming to expectations, which when all is said and done is not a very, I don't think, a very satisfying reading experience.
Yeah, and I think that's it. Because the Allreds were on, and I'm like, oh yeah, this can go anywhere. Like, it immediately gives me a feeling of like, yeah, this can go anywhere, because that's pretty much what Mike Allred's art makes me feel. Like,
Yeah.
like right before I read this or reread this, I finished a Silver Surfer with Dan Slott, and it's completely different from every Silver Surfer that's ever been written.
Yeah, that's good. That's
Yeah.
that's good storytelling.
Exactly. And the effect that Mike Allred's art has immediately is saying, this is going to be like nothing you've ever seen before, and it wasn't.
Yeah,
You mentioned Lex. Oh, go on, sorry.
Oh,
Go
I
ahead.
just want to say this real quick about the art. It's kind of like it's like when you get the first issue and it says, you know, it's like, is the 60s going to kill everybody, you know? It's like like if you look at like comics from that era, like one of my favorite comics is like Space War, right? And I know a lot of people have never heard of that, but I love that comic. And some of the imagery that I see like on the covers and the opening pages is like that, right, in this book. And so it's kind of has that 60s vibe to it, the energy, but it's different.
Yeah.
Right. And I can understand why, you know, you would pick the Allreds for something like this, because they're well suited for it. Like you said, it doesn't look like the Fantastic Four stuff or you know, the Challengers of the Unknown, but the spirit's there. You know what I mean?
Way, yeah.
Yeah. Like it comes off really, really well, you know. And I couldn't imagine, and I'm not dissing nobody or nothing, but I'm not imagining, I can't see who else would do it but them, you know. But I guess that's probably why you mentioned them first, you know.
Yeah. Laura's coloring too is exactly like it.
Yeah.
Evokes a 60s feel, because it looks flat, but it's not flat. You
Right.
know?
No, it's not. Yeah.
I think that, you know, one of the things they really brought to this was a very Silver Age sensibility, which is, you know, most of it feels like sort of like Silver Age storytelling. But I think a lot of what innovation is combining two things that don't necessarily belong together.
Right.
And I think that sort of like Silver Age sensibility and these characters told in a way as if they actually existed in our world, and being maybe a little more philosophically grounded and weirder than they normally would. It makes it feel innovative, because it's like, this is not, when you see it, you're not expecting them to say these sorts of things. You're not expecting them to be in this sort of world.
So there's two characters that immediately popped into my head when you were all speaking then. So Duy, you mentioned Lex.
Yeah.
And I wanted to mention Lex because the amazing thing about this Lex Luthor is that he doesn't give a crap about Superman. You know, every other Lex Luthor is obsessed with Superman, but this is like Luthor unleashed, because he doesn't care about Superman. So and he wins in a way, in the sense that he wins everything he wants. Like, so
but when does he win, Paul? When does he win?
On the very worst day to win. But you know, I mean, he wins as far as he thinks winning is, you know. Right. So I think what I wanted to ask is how, and Joker as well, actually, because he's not really obsessed with Batman. or in love with Batman in the way that he is in other comics. I mean, he does have an obsession and he's focused it on Bruce Wayne, but he doesn't know Bruce Wayne's Batman. So I guess, like, you know, how do you see the role of Lex and Joker? And do you think this obsession is actually an integral part of their character, or should they be done more like this, you know?
Well, I think that, you know, it's sort of like almost egomaniacal to think, well, the character's motivation is me. You know? And so I wanted to give them motivations outside their you know, professional wrestling enemy. You know? and I also wanted this universe, even though it's an alternate universe, to feel more like our universe than other universes you've seen in the DC. And to me, it's like, that means, well, what is a billionaire going to care about? What is a billionaire like Lex Luthor going to care about? Is it going to be some guy who doesn't have a penny to his name or a pot to piss in flying around at night? Or is it going to be the other big billionaire, you know, who's like, you know, his competitor for, you know, hegemony over the financial markets? And I think, yeah, he would see Bruce Wayne as a much more fitting rival than Superman.
Yeah.
Do you think that's just true now in general? Like, do you think there would be more mileage if Lex was just a Batman villain from now on?
Well, I can't speak to that, but I do think that it probably behooves us, at least it did for me for this story, to think not in terms of like, well, this is a Superman villain and that's a Batman villain, but just think these are heroes and villains within the DC universe. They all sort of know and interact with each other. They don't, you know, not know about Superman just because he's a metropolis, or, you know, not know about Bruce Wayne because, I mean, who name one billionaire who is not aware of billionaires in other cities, you know? You know, I think
Yeah.
that when you populate this world to make it seem like more like our world, they have to be aware of what's going on in the other parts of the DC universe.
And they're always fighting for the same contracts and stuff.
Yeah, they're natural rivals, and it goes back to like the 60s.
And I think, yeah, go ahead, Bill. Go ahead.
I was just saying, they kind of touched on that in other comics, that like Grant Morrison kind of used Bruce Wayne as sort of like in that Injustice League story in JLA, you know, the idea of like Lex Luthor didn't know he was up against Bruce Wayne, who is like another corporate raider, you know, and but I don't think it's ever been done as satisfyingly, and as it's not made as much sense to me as it has in Space Age.
There is a one of the Gnostic Gospels, there's a parable that Christ tells about this guy who like spent all night like figuring out, or he spent all year figuring out like, okay, well, if I plant this many crops and raise this many sheep and I get them to market on these days, I will make this amount of money. And he stays up all night figuring out when he can retire and how much he's got to do to retire. And when he finally figures it out, he goes to bed, and that night he dies. And I feel like that's kind of what happens to Lex Luthor. It's like he's invested all this time in his whole entire life in winning this game that he doesn't really get to enjoy it.
Yeah.
Where did the way that you depicted Luthor's personality come from? Because usually when we see Luthor in other media or other renditions, he's more, except for, you know, Gene Hackman, you know, he's more calm and collected, like very, very cold. So where did this very exuberant performative,
well, I think he's more like a, you know, more like we would think of like as a billionaire now. He's sort of like, you know, a bit spoiled and a bit like full of his, you know, believes his own publicity and is like kind of an egomaniac, but also not without like, you know, he's not a dummy. He's smart and he's witty, and but he just, his downfall is not that he's stupid. It's that he sort of believes his own press, and that he is, you know, willing to follow his obsession to the point of extinction.
I can imagine this Luthor turning up to Wayne Enterprises with a sink, and
yeah, he's that kind
of. So, Mark, you mentioned like you were talking about like doing these characters in ways that they're not normally done. So, the Flash really stood out to me when you said that, popped into my brain, and I'm a big Flash fan, and I absolutely love how you did the Flash. And I love the important role he plays in it, because it's almost like he's doing this detached commentary on everything all the way through. And then, of course, he gives Superman the big idea, which is amazing. Why did you choose the Flash for this role? And why was he so right for it, do you think?
Well, I think, I wanted the characters to all be different and, to not feel like, the same superhero with different costumes. And so I wanted to give them their own sort of like personality and background. For Flash, he's just a guy who his life has been sort of ruined by the fact that he's so fast, because now everyone else seems to be moving so slow. So he's got to come up with little hobbies and stuff to distract him. So he's never quite there focusing on the problem, because his brain works so much faster that he's just bored while they're discussing, Brainiac or the Anti-Monitor. He's like, can we go now? Or, he's like making like a ship in a bottle while everyone else is talking, because he's just got to keep himself. But I think also the thing is sort of important about him is that when you're thinking that much and you're not thinking consciously about a project, that tends to be when you come up with the best sort of solutions for that project. It's a strategy I bring to writing, where it's like, if I'm thinking too hard about what I'm writing, I tend to like ignore really creative answers. I tend to think about like, well, what works logically. Whereas if I go, as soon as I give up on writing something, I go take a shower or go for a run or whatever, that's when the solution hits me. And that's kind of what the Flash represents. He represents somebody whose subconscious is coming up with better answers because he's not thinking about it.
That's fantastic.
He's my new role model.
Yeah. And it makes so much sense with like how the Flash has been written over the years. Just the idea that he would come up with this idea of putting a costume in a ring, because he's got so much time to think of these wacky ideas.
Yeah.
So the other thing I wanted to ask was, bear with
Batman.
Batman.
Yes,
Batman? Absolutely. Let's talk about Batman. We've talked a little bit about the contrast between him and Superman and the trolley problem. How do you see Batman's role in this story? And, how do you see him generally? And would you like to work with him again?
Yeah, I would definitely like to work with them again, especially if I could do it with the Allreds. Because I think Mike Allred's Batman, just every time he sent me a Batman page, I just thought, well, this just looks amazing.
Yeah, it looks
and I
so
would love to
good.
see what Mike would do with like the Batman villains, which we didn't get to bring a lot of them into this story, but what he would do with sort of these Bowie-esque, like sort of Riddler or Penguin characters, I think would just be amazing. But to me, he was really sort of the dark id to Superman's ego. He's kind of like somebody who is also a hero who also wants to save people. But in a way, the way he puts it, it's like Superman has the luxury of looking into the stars. I have to be down. Someone's got to be down here in the gutters with people, and that's the way he sees his role.
I have a question, Mark. I think most of the time when I read something like this, or an Elseworlds, or whatever, or a Batman story, anywhere, someone at some point will always bring up that Batman is defined by when he was 8 years old, his parents died in front of him, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And you never do that.
Not in this one. Yeah, I think that, again, this is something I find kind of hokey about origin stories, that like sort of one sort of trauma or memory sort of defines you. In my experience, people sort of grow, and they it's a series of experiences. I understand why they do that for comics, because it's a very easy explanation. You have one page to explain, well, his parents were murdered, now he's a crime fighter, and in a story. But it doesn't feel very realistic to me. It doesn't really feel like how humans work, whereas most of us are aggregations of experiences where we change and we are moved by things that happen to us as we grow, and as we become adults. We're never really quite done changing. So I wanted him to feel more like what I think of as like a real person.
Well, I think that really stuck out to me, because I felt like this version of Batman was a significantly more well-balanced version of Batman than many comic book renditions in the last 25 years, or whenever Dark Knight Returns came out. And I thought that was interesting, because when he puts the suit on for the first time, it's to demonstrate it's for work. It's to demonstrate that it works. So it kind of tells me, like, I'm not sure if his parents died in this continuity, but it does give me the feeling that Bruce Wayne at some point would have always become Batman.
Yeah, I think that that would be an interesting story too. I think that'd be an interesting approach to Batman, to have like all these different universes where there's all these different origin stories, some which his parents get murdered, some which they don't. And in every one he becomes Batman or some sort of Batman.
There's a story, isn't there? That is it Alan Brennett, I think, and Dick Giordano did it, where like Batman goes to another Earth and saves the Waynes, but like little Bruce Wayne becomes Batman anyway because because he's always going to be Batman. Yeah,
right. It's just what he wants to do with his life.
Yeah,
it's an existential mission.
Yeah.
I like that at first the suit wasn't explicitly a bat, and then he just decided to run with it.
Yeah, that also seemed a little sort of hokey to me, that like he would just sort of like immediately go onto the bat, as opposed to it being like something that would evolve like he did over time.
Yeah.
I've heard it said, this is probably an old trope in comics criticism, that the biggest shame is that like Batman's parents weren't killed by cancer, because then he would have spent the Wayne fortune finding a cure for cancer.
Wow.
That's the interesting thing about this Batman, because you say like, you know, he views himself as being down on the ground and Superman's up there, but then he realizes that he's still up there too, because he doesn't know what his own company's doing because he's so out of touch. So
yeah, he realizes the mistake of his approach really quickly, because it's like, I stepped down as CEO of Wayne Enterprises to fight crime, but now all the real crime is happening at Wayne Enterprises.
Well, I think that's interesting because, you know, it is a thing that gets brought up on social media a lot, especially on Twitter, where if Batman really had this much money, then why doesn't he just do all of this stuff? And then usually people get into huge arguments about it. Some people are like, because that would make a boring comic, et cetera, et cetera. But then you actually went ahead and did it.
Line. You can't punch cancer. That's why.
But then you went and actually did it, and you attacked it in a way that made sense, wasn't boring. Maxwell Lord was there. I thought that was really interesting, and the fact is that none of it had to do with Superman. What was
it really only has to do with the Superman story, in the sense that like Batman is part of the Justice League, part of his like sort of milieu, and also to provide a relief, a counter point to what Batman or what Superman could have been like, or what Superman could have been like had he been like a mortal, as opposed to like this all-powerful creature.
So do you think Superman would, if he had just been born normal farmer guy, would he have found a way to do what he does, do you think?
I think if he had the same sort of mind and heart, and he was born without any powers, he probably would not even occur to him to become a superhero, or to try to be put on a cape and go out and do that things. He'd probably be perfectly happy being a journalist, or being a farmer, or finding some other, or a doctor or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mark, I have a question for you, because Paul asked you earlier if some of the stuff was straight out of your real life. The words, my father didn't run a world, he ran a farm. To my frustrated teenage mind, he thought like a farmer. I'm not asking about your dad, but it's just, was that indicative about people you grew up with?
Oh, definitely. I think that it in a lot of ways sort of expresses how I grew up. I grew up in Eugene, Oregon, which isn't by no means a small rural city, but I grew up like on the very outskirts of it. So like most of my early jobs were sort of agricultural related jobs, things like bucking hay and picking berries and stuff. And we had a very provincial sort of rural mindset, and it was sort of frustrating to me growing up. It was very much, I felt like about keeping you from the world, and it felt like the world was much more exciting. It felt like my I felt like, probably like a lot of kids did, my upbringing was too small for what I wanted for myself, and I think that's sort of the frustration that Clark Kent goes through too.
I think that gives a, you know, a very unique view for somebody tackling Clark Kent, because I think that one of the things that happens when you read a bunch of Superman comics is that he does love his dad unconditionally. He never really has anything bad to say about his dad or his mom, especially. You give him that particular nuance, which is okay. You can be frustrated with your parents. And
Yeah, it's not that they're wrong. It's just
Yeah.
that it's not what you want for yourself.
exactly.
Yeah, when he
Yeah.
says he feels his father judging him, and you know, I understand that, you know, because you want your parents to be proud of you, you know, and you want them to like what you do, and you're always worried that they don't, even when you're Superman. That was quite nice.
Yeah, he feels like everything about him worth being proud of is stuff he's not allowed to do.
Mhm.
Yeah. So I feel like we might be coming to a sort of natural end here, but Duy or LaMar, do you have anything else we could sort of bring up before we finish?
Yeah, I wanted to ask about, you know, because you know, Mark, you have mentioned before that you came into comics late, right? So given a bunch of the changes that you made to basically classic Superman like treatments, something as simple as the way that you treated kryptonite, which is not the same thing. Like so here in this book, kryptonite is remnants of rubble that have passed through a red sun, as opposed to remnants
Actual
of the
chunks of
planet
Krypton.
Krypton. Actual chunks
Which
of
never
Krypton.
made any sense to me. Just from a purely logistical standpoint, this planet explodes light years away. How much of that material is going to get to Earth? I mean, the answer would be none.
Do you get any pushback from that?
No,
Not at all. Is it
no.
because
I
this
think
isn't continuity?
people who would be annoyed by that sort of thing or know not to read me by this point. Don't bother with my stuff.
I love it. I love it. I love it. LaMar, you got
So
anything
was
to ask? Oh, wait, go ahead, Paul.
Oh yeah, go ahead, Paul. Go ahead. I'll go after you.
Oh no, I was just wondering, like, so was there any point when you were writing this? I mean, did you think, oh, fans not gonna like this, you know, or do you just not worry about that?
Yeah, I don't really think about that. Which sounds like, maybe I'm being disingenuous, but really I don't. I feel like I kind of operate under the assumption that if I like something, there's going to be, a million other people out there like it too, because I'm not that original. If I like something, I'm not that weird. I'm not a, some really weird guy with abstract tastes. That if I like it, if it seems good to me, that it's going to be good to enough people. And I always just kind of feel like you write for the people who like the stuff you do. You don't write for people who weren't going to read you in the first place.
Yeah.
It doesn't bother you. It doesn't bother you when you got hecklers and shit like that.
Stay
Because
mad. I don't care. It's like, yeah, it's to me, it's like if I'm making Dr. Pepper, someone contacts you and says, I don't like Dr. Pepper. It's like, okay, well, go drink, cream soda or whatever. It's no bearing on my
LaMar, sorry, what were you gonna say?
Oh yeah, I just got two questions real quick. I was curious about the the character designs and stuff like that, and like how did that process work? Working with Mike Allred, like were these his ideas, or did you kind of tell him what you were looking for and just kind of let him go crazy?
Yeah, more
And
the
I'll
latter.
ask,
I tried, because
yeah,
when you got Mike Allred, you got to let him be Mike Allred. You can't
yeah,
try to like,
mhm,
he's got to have this and that. It's more just sort of like, I just told him I told him more about like what I wanted,
mhm.
him to sort of feel like, is like his emotions and stuff, and just let him figure out what it was supposed to look like, because that's what he's amazing at. and also, when I would send him scripts, I would break pages down into panels and whatnot, and he would routinely, not without talking to me first, but he would, a lot of times just sort of throw my page breakdowns out the window and say, no, I'm not going to do 5 panels on this page and 6 panels on that page. I'm going to do 10 panels on one page and then turn the next page into a splash page, which worked incredibly well because he knows the scenes that are really going to that really call for like Allred,
Your script is a guideline. It's not.
Yeah. And
a
that's the way
shackle.
I approached it with them, is like, these are my suggestions. It's like, but if you want to move things around or, change them to like make the best drawing possible, go at it. And that's his job. He's the director of the movie.
Mark, how much of comic book writing is getting out of the way?
Yeah, I think a lot of it. I think the question is what you're trying to get out of the way of. And for me, what I'm trying to get out of the way of is details or, insignificant plot points. What I really wanted to get out of the way of, what I really want to like come through are the characters, the emotional connections people have to these characters and what they're going through. And I think you can kill that with too many subplots or plot points or trying to like introduce too many villains. So I really wanted to get out of the way of the characters just being people that people wanted to hear about.
Yeah, LaMar, you had another question.
Oh yeah, this one will probably be quicker. The scene where the pimp, he's with the 3 women that are working for him or whatever, and Superman kind of basically picks him up by his shirt collar and flies him to New Mexico. I was interested in if there's any correlation between that and Superman's encounter with the pimp in the Superman 78 movie where he talked about his outfit. And I was just curious about that because we were joking
because there are references to Superman 78 in the book.
Yeah. And I was curious if that was one of them because it always seemed to me
not
like,
consciously, but that's a great point because I know what you're talking about. So it's possibly that infected my subconscious. But yeah, that's a good point. I hadn't even thought about that. But yeah, it probably is why I chose the pimp.
Yeah, because I was like, because when you watch the movie, he just kind of looks at him when he's saying and he flies off because he's like, hey, I got better things to do. But I kind of feel like, Superman would have done something a little different than that. So I guess like in my head canon, this is what he does, right?
Right.
He just flies him to New Mexico. Hey, can I
love that.
Yeah,
Sorry,
go ahead, Paul. Go ahead.
I was just saying, I love that you see that guy working in the clinic in the 3rd issue. That's amazing.
Yeah, it worked out well for him.
Yeah.
The change of scenery did him good.
And I like that you don't call it out either. So you don't explicitly say it.
Sort
But
of
you
an
have to be
Easter egg.
very subtle.
Yeah,
you have to pay a little bit of attention.
You got to pay attention. I think that's another thing about getting the Allreds is it's easier to pay attention. I do think that Superman and Lois in any incarnation is pretty much my favorite superhero couple. But the way that they get together here, I think it's very genuine. It feels very genuine to me. And part of what makes it really genuine is the fact that she knows it's him, but just doesn't ever say it out of respect for his secret. I thought that was really cool. When did she know within this book?
That's a good point. I think she probably would have known while they were working at some point while they were working together. It probably would have the dime would have dropped. I mean, it's the sort of the thing about the in the movies and in the comics too. It's always like, how come Clark is never around? When there's a Superman sighting, or how come Clark's the only one who gets to take a picture or like gets these scoops on Superman. I think Lois, the one who, and like she says, it's like, I'm the reporter who cracked Watergate. You think I wouldn't notice that you were Superman? I just think it would have been impossible for him to keep that secret from her for long.
Yeah, every time this conversation comes up, I'm like, yeah, I can totally buy into that suspension disbelief, except for Lois. They can't buy that the greatest investigative reporter.
Yeah, cheek to jowl with like the greatest investigative reporter of your generation. they're probably going to notice that they're working with Superman.
Is she okay with living in the Fortress of Solitude, though?
I think she likes it. In fact, I'd originally written a scene which didn't make it into the final one for space reasons, where she like kind of looks around and she's like, "Oh my God, you realize what you've done? You've created the perfect writing retreat." And she's planning to like write a book. In fact, the third book was originally going to be narrated, at least in part, by like, you know, like I did in the first two. I did these sort of like stories that Lois wrote that sort of narrate the scenes of like the civil rights and also the Kennedy assassination. I was going to have in the third one about her just writing a book about where civilization went wrong, and her writing it at the Fortress of Solitude, and it's sort of narrating, you know, the whole thing with like Lex Luthor and getting out of prison and then taking over again at LexCorp, but there just wasn't space for it.
Can I also just say this is my favorite version of Pariah?
Yeah. Oh, yes. I meant to mention that. He's not
Yeah, no
crying.
question.
That's brilliant.
Because I love Crisis on Infinite Earths. George Perez is my favorite artist of all time. I think I told you that. But I hate Pariah.
Well, the thing about Pariah that I find interesting is that if you've seen these universes die, at some point you get acclimated to it. And it's sort of like Groundhog Day, you know, where it's just like, well, what am I going to do in this universe? Or how am I going to approach that one? And so if I were to do more in this sort of thing, I think the next Pariah would be a very different guy, because it's just like, this is like universe 10,587,000 I've seen evaporate. So this one, I'm trying to become an NFL quarterback, or in this one, I'm, you know, this one I'm like, I'm a billionaire like Lex Luthor or whatever.
That's exactly what we said the other day when three of us were talking about it. It's like he's seeing millions and millions of Earths die. He's not going to be like crying in his cape in every single one.
At some point, you just acclimate.
Yeah. Yeah. That's something we wanted to ask as well. Is, as a fan and a writer, what do you think of Superman being married generally? I mean, do you like it?
Yeah, no, I think I like it because I feel like it shows that he's not just this guy stuck in, you know, cellophane. He is a living, breathing person who goes through changes in life as we all do, and that he grows and matures.
Yeah.
And I agree with that one. Yeah.
Yeah, same. Yeah. Because, you know, that's the kind of thing, you know, fans talk about. You know, should he be married?
You know, people who maybe don't like it are, you know, kind of using this antiquated assumption that like, oh, well, now that you're married, we'll, you know, never see you again. You know, you're changing diapers or whatever. Whereas, you know, I'm married, you know, I still get out, I do all this, you know, still see my friends and stuff, and still do cool stuff. At least cool by my humble standards.
I have a question that you may not want to answer because you might want to leave it ambiguous. So let's play this game. At the end of the book, does Lois get together with that Superman?
Oh, wow. I think eventually. I think it probably takes some time. I think it probably takes some time for both of them, because they both realize that they're products of enormous loss. So, but I think over time they probably would.
Even though technically, you know, she's not his Lois, he's not her Superman.
He had a Lois that was more or less like her, and she had a Superman which was more or less like him. So I don't think that they would, you know, feel like, okay, yeah, we're together now. But I think that if they spent time together, eventually they would come to fall in love the same way Lois and Clark originally did.
I like that.
Did the Justice League take his pill?
That's a good question. Not in this universe, not in this iteration.
Okay.
Oh,
so there's no Justice League in the new Earth.
Yeah, at least not, you know, that we know of. I mean, maybe they're in the batch that hasn't been exhumed yet.
I've got this image of, like, you know, like Wonder Woman's like, I don't need a pill that'll cure everything. It's about, no, really, you need
yes. Trust me on this.
It would be funny.
The thing is that the idea of like using this to like transport them to this other dimension comes later. He doesn't have
Right.
it initially when he's just thinking, I'm going to heal everybody of every disease I'll ever have. So it's quite possible the Justice League would have said, thanks, but no thanks. I don't need it.
Yeah.
And then then it dawns on him like, oh my God, I can, when the Flash gives him that ship in a bottle, it's like, oh my God, what am I thinking? I could totally save the human race. So I don't know if they would have. I mean, it seems like at that point he probably would have said, "Hey, by the way,
You might want to take this.
That's such a great line when he says, where is that line? Yeah, it's like Brainiac is nothing if not reliable, nothing if not a survivor. His only mistake being the assumption that I must be too, because like I thought he was going to go through the hole with the crystal ball. Like, so it was just such a great twist that I thought was I was like, oh my God, he's not making it through.
yeah."
So it was
Well,
very
and
heartbreaking.
Radiac says earlier is like because they're afraid that like Superman will try some chicanery that, or that afraid he'll try to bring people with him because they know that's what he's about. That only one item can go through. So if he goes through and he's bringing someone with him, they can't go through. But he does. But what they're not expecting is that he would sacrifice himself for the object.
For everyone, yeah, for everyone else.
What I love about the idea that he doesn't know that he's going to save everyone when he's originally coming up with that pill. He just wants to heal everyone. At that point, he's still thinking, oh, the universe might still end, but I'm going to save everyone anyway. He's kind of doing what the Justice League are doing in their very last moments, just
Right.
save everyone, as many people as he can.
And that's the way he explains it to the Justice League when he quits. It's like I'm doing the same thing you're doing, but I'm doing it my own way. I'm going to achieve my potential as a scientist, which is the only power I haven't really exercised fully to this point.
Yeah. I enjoy the idea that he did get Batman's, and that on the day that Batman died, Batman gets brought back to life somewhere else, and it's just he doesn't know that he died.
Like, well, that was lucky.
It's like Batman dies on the best possible day there is to die, and Lex wins on the worst possible day to win. What a great twist. What a great twist. Mark, a lot of the book is about a meditation on the inevitability of death, and whether it's individual death or the death of society. And you've talked about how you come to terms with that, but how much has writing this book been cathartic for you in terms of that?
Well, I think writing is always sort of meditative to me. It's like I feel like I write best about the things that I'm sort of obsessed with or the things that I'm thinking about lately. And so it's always sort of cathartic. But I feel like this book in particular was really meaningful to me just because the thought experiment that Superman poses is such a great thought experiment. I think it's always attracted me to this character. It's like, well, what would the world be like if I chose to be my best self? Or what would the world be like if those in power actually chose to use it wisely? Yeah. I think is like sort of like a thought experiment, whether it be through Superman or some other means that we engage in regularly.
There's something that you said in our last interview that I think was really in my mind as we were talking about this. As I was reading this, as we were talking about it, you said about Superman, I think he's always been unrealistic. That's kind of what the draw is. You don't need fictional, realistic characters. What you need with fiction, particularly superhero fiction, is people that will make you think outside the box. People who will make you think about the possibilities that aren't obvious yet, because we're so focused on the immediate mundane realities and threats in front of us. Yeah, I think that was definitely all over this book.
Yeah.
Just the way Superman was acting.
That's the appeal of superheroes, and that's the appeal of writing, is that it's a chance to not think about the world as an ant, but to think about the world as sort of like a god.
Yeah. As you'd like it to be, rather than, yeah.
Or at least as I'd like someone to be.
Yeah.
I'm surprised, Mark. I know that you have a lot of thoughts about religion, so this is my last question. You guys might have other questions. I know you have a lot of thoughts about religion, and with Superman landing on Earth, was there ever a temptation to have like a sort of plot line or something where a religion forms around Superman or whatnot?
I mean, I think it's not something that occurred to me when I was writing this, but I think Superman would be the world's worst cult leader because he wouldn't want anything to do with it.
Without him having anything to do with it, like would people?
Yeah, I
be
mean,
like,
it's possible that they could form a a religious sect or something, but I think they would be very disappointed the first time Superman ever found out about it.
He'd be like,
I'm
"Stop it."
imagining, I'm imagining like Life of Brian with Superman now.
Right?
instead of
Yeah, he would be Brian.
Yeah. Yes.
You telling people to go home.
Yeah.
They would be walking around with this gourd.
That's fantastic. Well, thank you so much, Mark, for joining us in this discussion. And
Oh, thanks for having me.
yeah, and again, I can't recommend this book enough to anyone out there, not just superhero fans, just anyone who loves just great stories.
My
Check it
copy's signed, Paul. You see that?
Wow.
Thanks, Mark.
Signed copy.
I saw Mark 3 months ago at WonderCon. I was like, I was gonna trade with this, but I can't get you to sign a trade.
Thanks for having me on, guys. This was a lot of fun.
Yeah, thank
Oh,
you
yeah,
very
thank
much.
you for
Thanks
being
for
here.
coming.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Highly recommended, everyone. Superman Space Age by Eisner nominee Mark Russell, and it is itself an Eisner nominee for Best Limited Series. Mark Russell and Mike and Laura Allred. Hopefully we'll get to see you guys working again on something soon.
Yeah, I hope so.
Yeah.
Remember, click like, share, and subscribe. We'll see you next time.